All right, so today I wanted to start by talking about this story out of CTV News Northern Ontario, and it's titled, "In a new report by Equifax, total outstanding consumer debt now tops 2 trillion. Despite virus concerns, Patty Lavette-Reed explains the time to act is now to keep debt levels under control and outlines some warning signs to watch for." And Tom Quiggin responds by saying, Excessive debt will destroy us all." And it's something that I've been warning about for a long time. And again, people just don't really seem to want to listen because we live under this fantasy that any problem we have in society, the government can just step in and print money. Or, on the flip side too, that people, oh, you can always just, you can always put money on your credit card. You can always, have lines of credit. You can have car loan debt. You can have student loan debt. You can have endless amounts of debt these days, and the reason why we've sustained it so far is that the system needs the debt to keep going, right? Because technically it is impossible to pay off all the debt that exists these days, mainly the government stuff. So again, the problem being is that the system is reliant on said debt to keep going. So the problem being is that eventually the entire system's going to go belly up because eventually it will be unsustainable, right? There has to be a point to where it becomes unsustainable, right? There just has to be. That's just basic. That which cannot be continued, infinitely won't be, right? So this is something that's going to become a bigger and bigger issue. And the problem being is that because so many people just can't sustain things right now, the government is going to step in and pay the difference. And what does the government do to do that? The government doesn't have any money. They're just going to print the money, right? So, to pay off the consumer debt, the government's going to step in and pay off the debt, right? So that's how they're going to. Now again, the consumer debt will just go more because again, when you bail people out for making bad decisions, all that happens is you just get more bad decisions. It's not really very complicated. So, um, coming out of this whole situation, I mean, this is part of the reason why the economy hasn't completely collapsed recently too. Like a lot of you have a lot of sectors that really haven't even been hit that hard. And I think the reason being is debt, right? Like I was at a dealership the other day, a car dealership, and it's one of the luxury ones. I won't say which one specifically, but it was one of the luxury ones. And in talking to one of the managers, they said, "Oh no, we've barely even missed a beat." Like they said, "Yeah, we had a little bit of a slow time, back when it first started, but over the summer and up until now, they haven't missed a beat. Things are pretty much normal for them." And it doesn't make any sense considering the fact that Alberta, specifically Edmonton and Calgary, I mean everywhere basically, but we have really high unemployment right now. We have a lot of people that lost their jobs. We have a lot of people that lost their businesses. So again, how are people still sustaining things? Well, it's through debt, right? It's through debt. Um, so again, this is something that really needs to be it really needs to be dealt with. But the problem is that government has no incentive to deal with stuff like this because if they did, it would alienate their voter base, especially on the left, right? Because the entire worldview of the left is, or at least for the entire worldview of the left to make sense, you first need the concept of infinite resources to be a thing, right? Like for the leftist political worldview to make sense, the concept of infinite resources must be existing, right? Because the minute that resources are finite, it's impossible to argue that we should be giving them away in an unlimited fashion, right? Now, again, resources are finite. That's why debt is going to destroy us. But again, it's just, I mean, obviously there's a lot more that goes into it. But like I said, if resources are finite, then you cannot possibly argue to give them away in an unlimited fashion, basically in the way that the left wants to give them out, right? So yeah, and another big story here that I wanted to bring up is from Millhouse Van Houten here on Twitter, and he says there's been a total of 395 deaths linked to the virus in BC, likely about 70% of those over 80. I think the Canadian average is actually a little bit higher than that. I'm not 100% sure. I think it's around like 75% of people are over 80. But nonetheless, 70-75%, not a big difference. He says, in contrast, from January to October, there were 1,386 overdose deaths, 70% of those between the ages of 30 and 59, and probably like 90% of those between the, under 60. So if we're so worried about saving lives, then why are we not talking about this more? Right? This is the thing that I just can't stand about people. It's, oh, we got to lock down to save lives, right? If it only saves one life, well, how stupid can you possibly be to want to implement a policy where you're going to save, let's just say you're going to save 100 lives, but because of implementing said policy, 150 people are going to die from other causes because of the policy. Why would you want to do that? I don't understand how people can be this ignorant. Now, again, this is coming from just how terrible public schools are and how terrible the mainstream media is. That people are so uneducated that they genuinely believe that if you save X number of lives, then that must mean that it's a good thing, right? Like if we lowered the speed limits to 10 kilometers an hour, it would save a lot of lives, but it would cause a heck of a lot of other problems, right? So again, like not to mention too, there's many other ways if you can that you could do this. If we banned smoking, if we banned alcohol, right, that would save a lot of lives, but is it popular? No. So again, like anybody who comes up with their worldview and it's based off, ooh, we're gonna save lives, right? You should immediately become incredibly skeptical of those people because they're either incredibly manipulative in the case of the government whenever they bring this kind of stuff up, and that the real goal is not necessarily to save lives, it's to push a political agenda. And when it comes to the average person, usually it's because they're too stupid to have thought things through. And again, I don't mean to be too mean, but again, the reality is reality. I'm not going to pretend that, reality isn't reality just to not hurt someone's feelings. Again, if you actually believe this garbage, yeah, you really need to spend 5 minutes outside, watching CBC, right? So, yeah, again, if we're so worried about saving lives, why isn't this something that's been talked about more? And we know that the lockdowns have caused a lot of this stuff because there's a clear link between um, an increase in lockdowns and this kind of stuff, right? Like there's a clear link between that kind of stuff. And this is the other thing that I really can't stand that you always hear from the politicians and the city councilors and these kind of people. It's like, oh well, you criticize the things that we did, and right, like the fact that we clearly overreacted, we're clearly still overreacting. You tell them about how, oh, we were told not to wear masks and all this stuff, and their argument is always, well, hindsight's 2020. We didn't know at the time, but the one thing that we really do know right now, the one thing that we know for sure that is that suicides, there is a clear link between lockdowns and an increase in suicides. There is a clear link between lockdowns and an increase in overdose deaths, right? There is a clear link between these two things. There is no clear link between lockdowns and a reduction in cases or deaths. There is no clear link between lockdowns and a reduction in cases or deaths. This is the thing I just can't stand about these people is that it's so obvious it's not even funny. Like, a monkey could figure this kind of stuff out, and yet you have these people that are literally running our cities, like the people that are running our cities, that are running our provinces. Many of them don't even know this stuff, or they do, in which case they're just lying and manipulating the public for their own benefit, probably, right? So again, this is something that really needs to be talked about more. But again, so many people are just so dumbed down when it comes to this kind of stuff. It's almost impossible to get through to them. So, anyway, the next thing I wanted to talk about here is from Emma Garrett here saying, my dad died today in a nursing home. He was tested for, 3 times over the last 3 weeks. He was negative every time, yet we are told, will be put on his death certificate as the primary cause. Can anybody explain this to me? No, again. Um, I've seen too many examples of this kind of stuff to not question things. I think it's obvious to anybody who's even remotely paying attention whatsoever that the numbers have been inflated. In fact, the government has admitted the numbers have been inflated to some degree, right? So again, we know that the vast majority of the people that are dying from this are not dying from this, they're dying with this. We know that the amount of people that are dying with this, I think the number is like 2 or 3% of people who don't have serious underlying health conditions. I think the number is like 70, 75% of people that have at least three serious underlying health conditions. Like 90%, what was it, 87% have hypertension again. So we know what is causing people to die from this, right? And anybody who actually looks into this kind of stuff and comes away thinking, you know what we got to do to reduce cases and to reduce deaths? We got to close down the schools, right? We got to close down the gyms. Like, how stupid can you possibly be? We know that the vast majority, over 90% of people that are dying from this, I mean, 97, I think, is pretty much the exact number, are people with serious underlying health conditions. And not to mention, the vast majority of them have multiple serious health conditions. Even if you have just one, it's still not even that high. So, any policy, when it comes to this whole situation that isn't specifically geared at shielding the very old or the very unhealthy is coming from people that have either no idea what they're talking about or they're simply lying and manipulating people. Because again, the things are very clear. The numbers are very clear. We've been at this for 8, 9 months now. It could not be more obvious. I don't understand why people are still pretending like that it's so serious. Oh, we got to close down the schools because if we don't, everybody's going to, again, like, have we had any massive events that have we had any, deaths that have been traced back to schools? Like, no, we haven't, right? Again, so, and not to mention too, like, if schools were the thing that we're doing, like, you'd think we would have had, like, um, we would have seen a lot more coming out that would have made the concept of keeping schools open worse, right? The reason why the numbers are going up is because the numbers are so flawed, right? The numbers are so flawed that half the cases are false positives, and of the ones that are positive, most of them don't even matter, right? So we've been over this over and over again, but it's really not setting in for a lot of people. I do think that the majority of people are at least somewhat skeptical. That's something that I've definitely noticed. The problem is people don't seem to be able to put two and two together, and that they think that the government still cares about people's best interests, right? They care about people's best interests, but the reality is that if they cared about people's best interests, then they wouldn't have lockdowns, they wouldn't have mask mandates, right? Trying to imagine, why, like, again, like, this is from people who, like, don't even pay attention at all, and they're like, oh, I'm trying to figure out what their intentions with this kind of stuff is. The regulations don't make any sense, and like, you're trying to explain to them, like, they're not meant to make sense, right? They're not meant to make sense, but that just flies so far above people's head that it's impossible for them to wrap their heads around. So anyway, the last thing I wanted to bring up here is kind of an ironic thing from Eddie Zipperer here saying, I wish the media had cared about evidence when Brett Kavanaugh was smeared as a sex fiend or when Trump was being smeared as a Russian asset. Yeah, it's just textbook mainstream media double standards in that, they're all worried about evidence when it comes to voter fraud. Now, again, they've changed their tune when it comes to voter fraud, and that off the start they said, "Oh no, it didn't happen." To now, their opinion is it happened, but it wasn't enough to sway the election. Which is very funny because I mean they're clearly contradicting themselves. Now, again, do I think that it was enough to sway the election? I'm not sure. Given how desperate the left is to try and cover up and to censor and to just like so unwilling to have a reasonable investigation done into this kind of stuff, I would probably guess yes, because if they were confident in their ability that they actually won fair and square, they probably would be perfectly fine investigations being done. They probably would have not fought so hard against strengthening the security and the scrutiny as far as, going into the elections. They wouldn't have pushed mail-in ballots so much. They wouldn't constantly fight to remove ID verification, like all this kind of stuff that they fought against. Um, but again, like, were they cared about evidence when Brett Kavanaugh was accused? No. Were they cared about evidence when Trump was accused? No, both of those things were proven to be completely false, completely false. But yet, was there ever a fact check whenever some, big, person with a million followers on Twitter, was talking about that? No, there never was. Again, so this is just another textbook, clear as crystal example of mainstream media bias. So anyway, that's what I wanted to bring up today. If you liked the video, make sure you hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure you follow me in those other platforms. All those links are below. If you want to donate, you can do that as well. Again, appreciate whatever support I can get. But at the very least, just hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already.